Hi James, how are you today?
Hi Flora, I'm not too bad. How are you?
I'm good. So before we get started, I'm just gonna ask to see your ID real quick.
Yep.
Yep, all good. Okay, so today you have three questions that you will need to answer. Answer to the best of your abilities, and we will get started.
Yep.
So the first question, give me an example of a situation where you had to identify and manage a clinical incident or risk.
So, a clinical incident or risk.
Yep.
If I could think off the top of my head, I've got so many, but I guess there was this one instance where I think I was in Bankstown ED. I was there for 3 weeks. There was one patient that I had who he came in via the ambulance. He was triaged. Um, and he just wasn't waking up. Um, and when he did wake up, he became very aggressive. So the nurses and the doctors they decided to sedate him. And while he was being sedated, he did start to calm down and he fell into a deep sleep. And then after that, he just wouldn't wake up. And I remember this was actually my first day that I got onto the floor, and I was still getting sort of rotated around and what's it called? I was getting like a little tour of the whole place. And then the nurse that I was with, she was called over because one of the patients, a different patient, had to get resussed, and they needed as much as help as they could get. So another nurse came in. I think she was the nun, and she took over the little tour, and she said, "Okay, for now, we'll get you guys to split up and start pairing up with the nurse." So I put my hand up to go to the triage area, and that's where I met the patient who was sedated earlier, a couple of hours when he first came in. As soon as I got there, um, I noticed that like from my handover, it seemed like he was supposed to wake up again, but he just wasn't waking up. So I went up to him and then I tried to wake him up and just see if I could get a response. And I did the tight squeeze on the shoulder, and he just wouldn't wake up. So that's when I started to sort of worry a little bit. So I did my own neurological obs on him. I tried to, obviously I couldn't talk to him. He was fully just asleep, and he was very unresponsive, and his pupils weren't reactive at all. So I escalated immediately to my nurse, and I said, "Look, the patient isn't waking up." And the handover I got from the nun was that he was meant to wake up ages ago, and he was simply sedated a couple of hours ago. So something wasn't right there. So there was no previous history, like medical history that we were aware of. The only thing we knew was I think a day ago, prior to coming into ED, he was overdosed on some recreational drugs at party. Um, so yeah, like I got the nurse to do another set of neurological obs on him and try to wake him up, and he wouldn't wake up. So straight away, we spoke to one of the doctors, and the doctor came and did a little assessment on him. I wasn't quite sure what kind of assessment it was, but she did something and decided, like, oh my goodness, this patient actually needs to get intubated because they're just not waking up and the breathing is really low. Um, oh, that's another thing I forgot to mention. So I did do obs as well. He was hooked onto the obs on the computer, and I saw his oxygen saturations were a bit low, but they were like in between 94 to 95. So they weren't terrible, but he did end up getting intubated. And unfortunately, a couple of days later, he actually ended up passing away. And there was a condition that he had, which caused, I think, a buildup of ammonia in his brain. And none of the nurses knew this. And it was very unfortunate. And I guess one thing I learned from that situation was like, if you feel like something's off, the patient isn't responsive, don't waste any time. And before you do interventions like the way that we sedated or they sedated the patient, they should definitely have had a more extensive look at the patient's history because, they had no idea that he had this condition since childhood where his brain would build up ammonia and cause that unfortunate event to happen. So that's one instance where I had to manage um, a a case of that nature.
Okay. Your next question, describe a time where you had to communicate a safety concern to a patient, family member, or carer.
So one time I've had to, sorry, could you repeat that?
No worries. Describe a time where you had to communicate a safety concern to a
Ah, safety
patient.
concern. Okay, sorry. So a safety concern, again, I think another situation would be that same situation when I was in ED with that patient who unfortunately passed away. Um, so obviously with the patient not waking up and he was getting intubated instantly, and I remember the dad was actually there, and later on the sister and the mum came, and they had no idea what was happening because everything was happening very quick. And in ED, it's a very fast-paced nature. Um, and the patient happened to actually be Filipino, and I'm Filipino, so I could actually sort of relate to him and speak the language a bit because his English um, wasn't too good, but I definitely could speak just enough to sort of communicate to him. And he was asking me like, "Oh, what's happening? Like, could I just take him back home?" And I just had to basically tell him like, sort of, so the patient's obviously his sats are a bit low, and I felt like kind of weird saying this because obviously I'm just a student nurse, but I did ask the nurse, if I could let them know what's happening for now. And I had to communicate to them in another language, like, what happened and how he's getting intubated. And I told them, like, I'm not sure exactly what's happening. The doctor will um, update us on everything. But for now, you guys are going to have to just wait here. And I don't really know much that's happening. And that's all I could say. But I guess in that situation, I learned, like one way for me to sort of advocate for my patients is to, give them sort of like a rundown of everything that's happening and not to leave them like, lost and hanging just because there's so much going on. And yeah, I feel like in that situation, it was very daunting for me because I've never experienced, you know, having to give any kind of, like, I never really told the parents or anything about what's happening, or, it was very worrisome for me. So, yeah, like that was a situation where I had to tell the family, what was going on, and it was definitely a learning experience for me.
Okay, so for your last question, how do the New South Wales Health core values of collaboration, openness, respect, and empowerment relate to your role as a registered nurse?
So the core values, collaboration, openness, respect, and empowerment have really shaped the way I approach nursing. So, if I was to give an example, on one of my mental health placements, I noticed that a few of the patients hadn't had their vital signs checked in a few days because at the ward that I was working in, I'm sorry, at the hospital I was working in, I don't think they regularly did the obs because the patients were just they weren't very acute patients. But either way, I noticed some of the vital signs haven't been checked regularly. So I decided to, and it was pretty quiet. So I just asked the nurse if I could go, have a look at the patients and meet all of them by myself and sort of just quickly check their obs. And they weren't very acute. So I didn't really feel the need to have my RN with me because I was simply just getting the patients, I was just calling the patients up to come sit down and get their obs taken. I didn't do it by myself in the room. So yeah, no, I was doing all that, and then I noticed one of the patients actually, she was a bit tachypneic, and she was a bit tachycardic as well when I put her on the monitor, and yeah, I actually realized that she was having a bit of a mental kind of episode, and I escalated that to my nurse that I was partnered with straight away, and I feel like by doing that, you sort of collaborate with other nurses and tell them like, I've picked up on something and I really need some help here because I don't know what to do. And I guess with respect, like, if I never respected the patients, I would have checked their obs and everything. So that's how it's really shaped me as a nurse. And I really needed, that collaboration with the doctors and the nurses for their opinion on how I'm going to sort of go forward with taking care of my patients. But yeah, and respect and openness and collaboration are really important to me. And doing all that sort of helps me to empower my patients. I feel like also by involving the patients as well in in their care and asking for their consent and maintaining their dignity is sort of part of empowering them and making sure that they have a say in their own outcome as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for answering. This is the end of your interview. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Yeah, thank you.